medicine. So we will be doing orthopedic and then we will go to orthopedic chapter. Okay. So in orthopedic is one of the most important topic as well. Like there is certain fractures and certain things that you need to know, especially you need to know the x-rays. So orthopedics is all about x-rays. Whichever topic you are reading, make sure you see their x-rays as well. And just the basic idea about what kind of investigations we are going to do to figure it out. There is many of them where we need to do an X-ray, and where there is many of the cases where we don't need to do the X-ray. I like there is many investigations like in especially in orthopedics, the answer is X-ray, but you as a emergency or family physician needs to know in which cases you need to order an X-ray and in which cases you don't need to do the X-ray. That's more important. Then goals of emergency medicine is basically finding out if it's a life-threatening or limb-threatening condition, reduce and immobilize the fracture, and then painkillers, and arrange a follow-up with the family physician. So starting with same history, what happened and how and everything as in sample. Then we are going to start with look, like a physical examination. They can ask you in a MCQs by giving you a scenario by what are you going to look in the like a patient fall down, he has pain in his leg or something like that, and then they says what are the physical signs that you should see. So we are going to start with seeds like swelling, erythema, atrophy, deformity, and then skin changes. So seeds, as if you can remember the same. Then feel all joint, basically the crepitus, we check for that swelling, warmth, and all that. So if they ask for physical examination, you can start with look. But let's suppose if this is basically a fracture, then in that case, you don't have to write down the atrophy, deformity, because that does not make sense with someone who just fell down. That's a trauma case, right? So you have to figure out, you just need to see the swelling, erythema. In skin changes, we have to see the bruises and then move on to the feel. But when it comes to a diabetic wound or when it comes to a long-term muscle, something going on, then in that cases, you need to see atrophy, deformity, if this is a prolonged thing and there was cost and all that. Then feel all joint bones for the local tenderness, swelling, crepitus, joint effusion, subtle deformity. Then move. So, especially when we are working as a family physician or even you are working as an emergency physician, so your first thing is checking for the range of motion. So, we do write down limited range of motion or active range of motion. Okay. Then neurovascular injury. So, we usually write down as a bilateral equal pulses of the both of the limbs. So you have to check for the both of them, right? Why I'm saying this bilateral, because you have to, although he has like a wound or whatever fracture on one foot, but you still have to compare it with the other one. So as compared to the other one, some people do have diminished pulses like naturally. So don't just say by that you have to compare it with the other side. If it's like the same on the both sides, then you don't have to say anything about it's a diminished or something. Then what are the cases where the life threatening is and when limb threatening is? So in that cases, you can figure out if it's a life threatening and it's a limb threatening and how you're going to approach. So life threatening is different and then limb threatening is different. Life threatening is all about the big one, the pelvic, amputation, fat emboli, or any vascular injury, like there was too much bleeding going on. So, and then when it comes to limb threatening, compartment syndrome, crush injuries, open fractures, so they can give you a scenario by the patient has a cast on for like 5 days. Now he's having this all the compartment syndrome symptoms and asking you what kind of injury is it or what is your approach, or they can give you an MCQs by saying is it a life threatening or is it limb threatening. So if you don't know compartment syndrome is a life threatening or limb threatening, you will be keep on mixing up. So that's why you need to remember the name of these ones. Then open fracture, usually open fracture is basically we can see from outside like a skin is broken, and then you can sometimes even the control bleeding with the pressure, then remove debris. So how you're going to approach that case. So there is more chances of having infection like osteomyelitis. So remove the debris, clean, sterile the irrigation, debridement, all of that, then control the bleeding with pressure, then splint and antibiotics. And if need for surgery, then we go for that. Standard of the care is a secure, definitive surgical management within 6 hours. This 6 hours is important. They can ask you when are you going to make the surgical management. Vascular injuries is basically checking for the Doppler one. And usually the Doppler one is basically to confirm that, if they have any DVT or anything like that going on. Surgical consult and direct pressure if the external bleeding, so if there's any bleeding going on. Compartment syndrome, so 6 Ps, as if you have to remember them on the fingertips when the intracompartment pressure is more than that, and then you have to see in which cases there is more chances of having compartment syndrome. So like having burn, that's very important. Having cast for too long, that's important. So they will not give you like, a patient with compartment syndrome. They will give you cases scenario where he just developed the compartment syndrome. Okay. So pain out of proportion, pain more. Sometimes they don't give in sign and symptoms. They give you as a scenario where the complication is compartment syndrome, and now they ask you to how to manage it. Okay. Pain out of proportion, pain worse with a passive stretch, tense compartment, and then 6 Ps, the pulse pressure and all that. Here is the 6 Ps: pulse, pallor, paresthesia, paralysis, pain, and then polar. So in this one, our radial pulse is basically 12 to 16 and all this one. If an unconscious patient, striker, compartment syndrome monitor can be used. So require the decompression by cutting the cast or dressing, or the emergency fasciotomy may be needed in the cases of burn. So you need to know in that cases, they can just give you a scenario where the complication was compartment syndrome. Now he is having pain out of proportion. Now what you need to do is, so just jumping onto the treatment. So maybe removing the cast, removing the fasciotomy. So don't mix up these things. When dealing with the open fracture, remember the stand, splint, tetanus. Don't ever forget about tetanus when it comes to dirty wound. I mean, they can give you a scenario where they were just looking for tetanus prophylaxis. So always keep it in your back of your head. Just like how in female they want you to do the beta HCG. So you have to keep that in your head. Antibiotics, neurovascular status, and then dressing. Then comes to the upper extremity, then you can see, and then mainly important the x-rays. How does the x-ray look like? And then, what kind of fall can make what kind of fracture. So outstretch fall, outstretch hand fall, and then falling on the, shoulder, like on the side. So in those ones, they do like to ask. So you can see, and which nerve is mainly damaged, especially in the anterior shoulder where the thing is, and then the ulnar nerve, that's very close, and then radial nerve, that's very close to the radius. So in that cases, so usually we do for x-rays, and then with a forceful injury and look for the fracture. Cooley's fracture, how does the Cooley's fracture look like on x-rays? That's more important. Okay. And then in which kind of fall it presents with, fall on the outstretched hand. Then anteroposterior and then lateral film, you can see reduce, immobilize. So basically the ICE method, basically reduce, the immobilize, outpatient follow with the orthopedic immediate in the orthopedic consultation or referral. Outpatient fracture is basically clinic or orthopedic referral in unsatisfactory reduction in the emergency. Scaphoid is basically the anatomical snuff box. X-ray. So here is one of the very important thing. Negative X-ray, thumb speaker splint, repeat X-ray in 1 week, or you can go for CT scan. If it's a positive, then we do the thumb speaker splint, and then 6 to 8 week, and then do X-ray in 2 weeks. So it's important if they can give you a scenario, we're asking when are you going to repeat the X-ray or when you're going to follow up with the patient. So in negative one, either do X-ray in 1 week if the pain is not resolving, and thumb speaker splint, and then either go for CT scan. And then in the cases of positive one, you have to do that one and then repeat the X-ray in 2 weeks. So treat based on the clinical suspicious is more important. As they said, clinical suspicious is more than enough. Instead, even you don't have to do for X-rays. So in that cases, we can give you where the patient is having a pain in anatomical snuff box, a pain on the axial, loading up the thumb mainly on the thumb side, and now they're asking what are you going to do. So they are mainly not looking for an X-ray. They're mainly looking for if you are able to go for the thumb speaker splint comfortably or not. Then risk for avascular necrosis of the scaphoid is important, and then follow up. So here is one of the most important table where you remember why and which cases you are going to go for X-ray. So a knee X-ray examination is required only for the acute injuries with one of the following, like if the age is 55. So just remember, the old people, every kind of cases, any kind of stupid cases or whatever it is, if it's an old age, they want you to do something. So it's like a geriatric thing. So age 55 or older, tenderness at the head of the fibula, isolated tenderness of the patella, or the inability to flex the joint to 90-degree, inability to bear weight. So these are the one of the thing will present, then you go for X-ray. Then if you can see here, eversion of the base of the fifth metatarsal in the inversion injury, so tensor, and then this one is also there. So in which cases you are going to go for X-ray, in which cases you don't need to do an X-ray. So mainly they already told this one. An ankle radiographic series is required only if there is any pain in the malleolus joint zone or any of the following, like bony tenderness. So bony tenderness at any point in the medial or the lateral side, and inability to bear weight. So if a patient can present, he has bony tenderness but can walk. So it means he can bear weight. They did not use the word bear weight, but they mentioned the word that he can walk. In those cases, you are not going to do an X-ray. Okay. Then a radiographic series is required only if there is a pain in the midfoot zone. So bony tenderness at C and B. So you can see which one is C, the fifth metatarsal one, and then D is basically navicular bone, like mainly on the foot. So inability to bear weight. So two things are main important: bony tenderness along with inability to bear weight. So usually, if one of the either one is present, we go for X-ray. In those cases where they says the bony tenderness is too much, usually when there is bony tenderness, there is an ability to bear weight. If they still mention that there is ability to bear weight and they have bony tenderness which is not resolving, they do give you where the different lines where they want you to go for an X-ray. If they says there is a bony tenderness which is mild, they will use the word mild, and he is able to walk. In those cases, what will you do? So they won't make it very complicated for you. They will give you a hint where you will be able to justify why are you going for an X-ray. Then comes the wound management. The tetanus prophylaxis is one of the most important. You can also do it from, I think, dermatology. There is also one of the table for tetanus too, so you can read it from there as well. Identify the injuries and stop any active bleeding. Then management, so wound examination, then cleaning, antibiotic, tetanus prophylaxis, closure, and the dressing. Tetanus prophylaxis in those cases where the vaccination history is present. So you have to see where, in which cases. So in dirty wounds, we usually give the tetanus shot as well as the tetanus immunoglobulins. But mainly when there is, patient is unsure of last three doses. Usually these days, everything is electronic recorded, so everything is written there if they have gotten a shot or not. So it's very easy to find out if they have or not. But if they say is unknown, like a patient just recently came from Pakistan or came from India or somewhere else, now they are not giving you anything. They says he was unsure, he came from India or whatever, and now he has a dirty wound. So in those cases, you have to give the Tdap and tetanus immunoglobulin as well. Okay, so the country and not sure of, these two factors will help you. Three or more doses is like he was sure of that. So in clean wound, we don't give even tetanus shot, not tetanus immunoglobulin. But in other cases, the, you there is you can give the tetanus shot, and then you don't need to give tetanus immunoglobulin. But recently, they says if three or more doses is there, and it's a dirty wound, but it's on the healing stage. So usually people don't present right away. They present like after 2 3 days, and dirty wounds basically a dog bite or something like that. And they're requesting for tetanus. In those cases, we do give tetanus. But in those cases, like tetanus prophylaxis, tetanus is already like he has already gotten his tetanus last time, like maybe 1 year ago. And he had a dog bite now again. So in those cases, you can defer the tetanus shot. So the contusion is basically rise. Then what is that? Rest, ice, compression, and elevation. High risk factors for the infection, wound factors, puncture wound, crush wound. So what are those ones? These are the high risk factors. And then in the patient, especially the prosthetic valves or immunocompromised patient who's taking steroid, age more than 50, and don't forget about PTINR, so it can increase all those risks. Then it comes to bruised abrasion. You can read this one. So mainly the abrasion is also comes along with the tetanus prophylaxis. Don't forget the tetanus prophylaxis. And wherever this is dirty wound, like a cat scratch, dog bite, where there's a bleed. a little bit of bleed. So in that cases, it's important you have to see the tetanus prophylaxis. Then comes the laceration. In laceration, usually we see how much the laceration is, like how deep it is, and like what was the cause of it, like how did it happen. So physical examination, think about underlying anatomy, examine how, like which tendon was broken, which bone was broken, and whatever. Clean and explore the in local anesthesia. So in that one, and then X-ray or ultrasound, whatever is needed to check for the foreign body. Then management is basically disinfection. Always remove the foreign body in the emergency department. Irrigate the copious and then analgesics and anesthesia, and then go for lidocaine, basically anesthesia, and then remove that one. This is important in children. Topical anesthesia like lidocaine, epinephrine, and tetracaine. Distraction provided by the child life specialist or the parent, and in selected cases, short-term like benzodiazepine can be given for sedation and amnesia. Then secure hemostasis, hematoma, suture, unless delayed presentation. So in the delayed presentation, how delayed it is? More than 1 day. So more than 24 hours. Puncture wound or bite or crush. So in those cases, let the wound heal by itself. Although people do want to cover it, they do request for it, but you can let them know that it's a secondary healing and it has to be, open. Take it into the account, patient and wound factors. Advise the patient when to have the suture removed. Cellulitis and necrotizing fasciitis can present later on. Early and wound irrigation and debridement are the most common factors in the decreasing infection. So first important thing is wound irrigation and then debridement and all that. Alternative to suture is basically glue and staples. Let's we already did the abdominal pain. So in this one, you can see a little bit here. We already discussed as NPO, IV, and G tube, mainly all of that. There's one thing I want to do the back pain from here. So then we can go to. So let's do the headache and then we can go to back pain. So it's basically the common migraine. So you need to know the difference between common migraine, tension headache, and the other headache. Okay. So the one with the common migraine is basically with the unilateral thrombing migraine with aura and without aura. You need to know the difference of both of them. So Ottawa's rule is basically this is for the subarachnoid hemorrhage, used for the alert patient older than 15 years with new severe non-traumatic headache reaching maximum intensity within 1 hour. No, not for the patient with new neurological deficits, previous aneurysm, subarachnoid hemorrhage, brain tumors, or the history of the recurrent headaches. So investigate if more than one of the risk factors present. What are those one of the risk factors? Age more than 40. So they did not say 50. Here the age is more than 40. Neck pain or stiffness, witness of the consciousness, witness loss of consciousness and onset during exertion, thunderclap. So you can get an idea of what they're talking about, subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay, so thunderclap, headache, and then there is a limited neck flexion on the examination and all of this one. Then comes to the tension headache. So tension headache is basically bilateral and usually comes with some sort of like sleep deprivation or any new stress going on in the life that usually give you the triggers and can last for 30 minutes to 7 days. So in that case, is modify the stressors and give NSAIDs. Subarachnoid hemorrhage is basically a case where worst headache of the life. There is nausea, vomiting, pain with exertion, and then CT scan sensitive within 6 hours of onset, and then LP if like CT scan was normal after 6 hours. Increase ICP, we already discussed this one. So when supine or bending with cuff or Valsalva, so usually with the movement and worse in the morning time. Physical examination is basically all the same: papilledema, neurodeficit, and then cranial nerve palsies. So a patient can present with the blurry vision and having headache with cough. Now it's a very vague symptoms. It can be like, oh, it can be anything, but this is basically, and he's having headache with the cough. And when you can ask him, okay, what is the headache related to it? So he will say that headache is one of the most important factor that was there, along with the cough and then blurry vision because of the papilla edema. So increase ICP in those cases. CT head, LP if suspected idiopathic intracranial hypertension, and then we can go for consult neurosurgery. Then comes the meningitis. Meningitis is basically, you need to know the CSF criteria for viral, for TB, and for the other one too, the bacterial one. So it will present with the nausea, focal neurological deficits, seizures, papilledema, CSF is high, WBC, and then grow for organism. Investigation is basically checking for ruling out ICP. So you have to go for CT scan. And the lumbar puncture is to rule out, or it's a perform a diagnostic one. Diagnostic is basically lumbar puncture. And treatment is antibiotics. Then comes the giant cell arteritis, one of the most common and very famous one in Canada, and it is the most common cause of causing the blindness. Okay, so they usually like to test if you know this one. Like they do like to test in many of the case, like many of the exams. Vasculitis and the large and the mid-sized arthritis, gender, female is more common, and then ages is more than 70. So remember this age factor, the female factor. Then this is basically a headache, scalp tenderness, then jaw claudication, arthralgia, myalgia, fever, malaise, and all this. Then temporal artery tender on palpation. So when you touch it, it's painful. Optic disc edema as well on fundoscopy. That's why you have to check for the blindness. So usually we go for biopsy. It says a gold standard, but not all the time it is diagnostic, although it's a gold standard, because you can be take a specimen from some of the temporal artery where there is no arthritis going on, so it's not something diagnostic, but it's a gold standard. Then elevated ECR, C-reactive protein associated with fibromyalgia rheumatica. So starting with the high dose steroid. Okay, so you need to know the how to make the diagnosis, especially the female factor, age factor. That will help you a lot of an idea. And claudication, scalp tenderness, all of this one. It's not an headache, it's a tenderness. When touch, then it hurts. Then the cerebral venous sinuses is basically the onset of headache, vomiting, papilledema, all of that. So you go for CT scan and then anticoagulation. Now this is important. When are you going to admit and when you are going to discharge? If underlying diagnostic is critical, there are abnormal neurological findings and immunocompromise, age is old, having a lot of like heparin or any anticoagulants he's taking, and you are thinking of subarachnoid hemorrhage, in those cases you go for admission. But in those cases where there is a discharge, like you feel like a narcotic can relieve it, and patient might feel better, you checked everything, fever is resolved, no meningitis or any paresthesia or any signs of weakness, anything, nothing is there. In those cases, you do discharge, but at the same time, you instruct the patient if anything of this happen, you can come back. So meningitis, do not delay IV antibiotics for LP. Deliver first dose of dexamethasone with or before the dose of antibiotics to prevent ICP. Now comes to the joint and back pain. So this was the one we are talking about. So when it comes to back pain, so you have to see the seeds part. We already discussed that seeds one. So then especially fever, constitutional symptoms. Constitutional symptoms is like weight loss, night sweats, those are the ones. Then skin lesions, conjunctivitis, urethritis, because to rule out any sorts of infection going on, or it's related to some sort of any other SLE or anything going on. Polyarticular or the monoarticular, how much it is. So then morning stiffness is important, in which cases there is morning stiffness and for how long. In inflammatory, it's more than 30 minutes, and in non-inflammatory, it's less than 30 minutes. So you can just read the difference between inflammatory and non-inflammatory. That's more than enough. So pain and stiffness that ease with the activity is inflammatory, midday fatigue, and then soft tissue swelling. In non-inflammatory, there is a morning stiffness less than 30 minutes, stiffness short-lived after inactivity, and increased pain with the activity. And then come the investigation. We do CBC, ESR, C-reactive protein, INR, PTT, blood culture, urate, so joint X-ray, collateral, like we do everything to find out what is going on, where the pain is coming from. When it's fractured, just go for CT scan right away, sorry, X-ray right away. And if you feel like there is a foreign body or any fusion, then go for ultrasound. on the basis of whatever the given in the scenario. Think about what kind of investigation. They won't be asking about generally everything. That's mainly the NACOSCI, where they be like, what is the investigations you would like to do? Okay. Red flags of the back pain is basically checking for the bowel and dysfunction like quad equina syndrome. Anesthesia, constitutional symptoms, chronic pain, constant pain, paresthesia, age more than 50, IV drug use, and neuromotor deficit. Then comes to the management if, like, based on whatever the diagnosis is, septic joint, then go for IV antibiotics, and then along with that orthopedic consultation, crystalline synovitis. So in those cases, go for NSAIDs. Do not use allopurinol at the acute flares of the gout. Then go for the acute polyarthritis, then NSAIDs and analgesics. Mainly the NSAIDs is used. Soft tissue in those cases, local heat and cold compression, electrical stimulation, massage. As I said, in emergency physician, we do give painkillers and ask them to follow up with the family physician. Then comes the back pain. In the back pain, the most important is, I think, the table. I think it's in the family medicine. Rule out all of that one. So you are going to do whatever the thing is. Basically, ruling out the cauda equina syndrome is very important in the back pain, and ruling out the sciatica as well. Then WBC, ESR, C-reactive protein, then you do everything generally. Then treat underlying cause, mainly where the thing is coming from. Okay. Then let's go to orthopedic. Sure. Just give me a second. See here. Okay. Move a bit down. Okay, so we are coming to orthopedics. In orthopedics, you don't have to do a lot of things, mainly the fracture, the pain, the localization of the pain, where the pain is coming from, and in which cases, what are you going to do, mainly where you are going to order the x-rays. So let me just go there. Okay. Okay, so here. Okay, so here orthopedics is basically you don't need to do a lot of this one. Starting from here, orthopedic emergencies. So let's go to orthopedic emergencies directly. Just don't forget to read sidebar quickly, okay, from the sides. As you can see, there is something here. Indication of the open reduction when you're going to do the open reduction. So if you do this one, you don't have to read the whole topic. So reasons for the close reduction and splinting. So in pain control, reduces the further damage to the vessels, reduces the pain location, loading, sorry, decrease the risk of inevitability, and facilitates a patient transport. In the open reduction is basically non-union open fracture and non-neurovascular, intra-articular, and then polytrauma in those cases. So just give a quick read from there. Fracture blister. What is a fracture blister? So formation of the vesicle when you did the fracture, like, there was a fracture bone, and then on that one, the skin becomes like there is a vesicle formation over there. Then this one is very, very important. I saw one of the MCQs from here. Hypertrophic ossification, the formation of the bone in abnormal formation secondary to the pathology. So they ask what is the callus formation and what is the heterotrophic ossification. Avascular necrosis, ischemic or the basic of bone due to disrupted blood supply. Okay. Um, then here. Then basically the emergencies basically what are the workup you usually do. So it's a mainly ABCs protocol, how you're going to approach the main cases. So don't forget about ABCs and then move on to whatever the thing is. And when you are doing orthopedics, I would suggest read the complications. In this chapter, the main important is complications more than anything else. Complication is hemorrhage, fat embolic syndrome, venous thromboembolism, bladder or injury, or the vascular damage, pain, paresthesia, limb weakness, and then traumatic osteoarthritis and sepsis. Although we are kind of aware of it, but when we are going to choose from MCQs, we kind of mix things. That's why reading the complication from which kind of fracture, what kind of complication can happen. So that's why it's important. Okay. So open fracture is basically how you're going to approach. So it's same ABC's protocol. We'll just read a quickly one. And then foreign material, irrigate that one, then sterile dressing, IV antibiotics, then give the tetanus prophylaxis, NPO, and then we're going to go for the ORI, open reduction, internal fixation. The Kodak Vana syndrome is in neurosurgery. We'll do tomorrow, the neurosurgery. Then compartment syndrome. Here comes the compartment syndrome. Although it's a pathogenesis, but I do read some of the things like MCQs where they were asking about the acidosis, like what kind of findings of the compartment syndrome, or with the compartment syndrome what is the lab result. So basically the acidosis, they were looking for the word acidosis. Most common signs is the increased pain with the passive stretch. Most important symptom is pain out of proportion of the injury. So in this one here, the investigations is basically investigation usually not necessary. So it's a clinical diagnosis, okay? So the word here is clinical diagnosis. But when they give you a question where they already did a blood work and looking for what is the test you would like to do, so like, or what is the finding, then basically they're looking for acidosis. In children's unconscious or associated peripheral nerve injury, where the clinical exam is unreliable, compartment syndrome monitoring with a catheter can be done. So then rule out the osteomyelitis could be one of the things. So as we already discussed about this one, so mainly the non-operative one, removing the cast, splint, or whatever is going on. And then operative is basically in the burn patient, we do fasciotomy. 48 hours to 74-hour post-operative necrotic tissue debridement, wound closure may require the delay closure or the skin drafting. So this is important. The complication, as I said in the orthopedics, please read the complications of each and every topic. Just quickly read it. So take a look at the topic name and then read the complication at least. Complication is basically Walkman's ischemic contracture, and then the rhabdomyolysis and renal failure leading to myoglobinuria. And then you can read from the sidebars, acute myelitis is osteomyelitis is a medical emergency. In those cases, go for antibiotics right away. Joint most commonly affected by the septic arthritis is which one? Ascending order. Which one is starting from knee, then hip, then elbow, ankle, and sternocleidomastoid. So you can start from the below, go from down to up. Then osteomyelitis is basically the symptoms is pain, fever. In on examination, you look for erythema, tenderness, edema, all of whatever the signs of infection. Then acute and chronic. Acute is basically given antibiotics, going on for only 4 to 6 IV antibiotics for 4 to 6 weeks. In septic arthritis, mainly they ask for the joint fluid, examination. How does it has whatever the thing it is. So joint aspirate is basically this one. Although we do X-ray to rule out fracture, but joint aspirate is help you with the diagnosis. So cloudy yellow fluid WBC more than 50,000, more than 90% neutrophils, protein level, no joint, sorry, joint glucose less than 60, and then blood glucose level, no crystals and positive, gram negative. Listen for the heart murmur if there is anything like infective endocarditis going on. Go for IV antibiotics. As you can see, the treatment is kind of, makes sense. If it's an infection, go for IV antibiotics. They're not looking for amoxicillin, ceftriaxone. They're looking for just writing down antibiotics. But at the same time, they are not just looking for antibiotics, but they're looking for the word here and adjacent following joint aspirate. It means you are going to give antibiotics, but you have to follow up. That follow up is the most important word as compared to giving antibiotics. That's why I'm saying looking for the words. So in the scenario or whatever the MCQs, they can give you IV antibiotics with the serial joint aspirate, IV antibiotics with the joint aspirate culture and sensitivity after 1 week. So, it kind of makes sense, but you have to see how much they are saying. So adjust following joint aspirate culture and sensitivity results. So you, on the basis of that one, you're going to see and adjust the antibiotics. Then comes the shoulder dislocation. In this one, it's mainly important for the Nakoski, but here is one of the thing. Sorry. Yes. So you have to see first of all how does it look on X-ray. Very, very important because those black and white pictures does not make a lot of sense. So you have to keep your tricks wherever you have to find what are you looking for and from the diagnosis what they're giving. Okay. So they will say a 29-year-old guy, he just fell down or he pulled his shoulder or whatever is going on. This is his X-ray. What's your diagnosis? And he's having pain on this point. So either you can go with the lines or you can find out from the X-ray what it is. Okay. So that's why I'm saying you have to go through the, even very black and white pictures. How does they can make sense to you? So just see the radiographic findings. Humerus has its head is anterior, humerus head is posterior. Although in X-ray, if it's a not clear X-ray, it's very impossible to find out where the head is. So I would suggest keep your, finding like, they will give you a patient who what kind of fall it was. Okay. Like he fell on the front, he fell on the side, he fell on the back. And what kind of pain happened? Is it coming from the front or it's coming from the back? And what kind of movement is increasing the pain? These will help you in the thing. I mean, although they give a good x-rays, in some pictures they are visible, but in some pictures, like fractures are very visible. That's very visible. But when it comes to dislocation, the x-rays are not very clear, especially in exam point of view I'm talking about. So pain and arm slightly abducted and externally rotated. So in this one, initially to rotate in, like there is a pain in internal rotation for the, sorry, for the anterior one. And in the pain in the external rotation is for the posterior one. And you can see what kind of mechanism, like how did he fall? That fall will help you to figure out what's going on. So if you can see abducted, externally rotated, hyperextended arm, blow to posterior shoulder, so the someone hit him from the back, now the pain is in the front and basically the anterior shoulder is dislocated. It kind of like makes sense, someone is like, who has a blow from the posterior, so that's why the anterior thing came out. So involuntary, traumatic, voluntary, and atraumatic. When it comes to posterior one, so fall, outstretch hand, he fall on the front, that's why the shoulder moved towards the back. Abducted, internally rotated, flexed arm, 3S is basically, it's very common in epileptic seizures, alcohol, electrocution, and blow to anterior shoulder. As you can see, the mechanism itself is making a lot of sense that it's an anterior shoulder dislocation or a posterior shoulder dislocation. So you don't have to go into very detail of looking for x-rays or, finding out what's the thing. So looking for the mechanism, they will give you an idea how did he fall, or like the fall will make a sense to you, like what kind of fracture or what kind of dislocation it is. And it's mainly the anterior shoulder dislocation is more than 90% as compared to 50%. So they will say it's very unlikely that, this kind of shoulder pain is there, but he's having this pain. So this very unlikely word can give you a lot of idea. Then radiograph scientists, you can see what are those ones. Just see a quick read. In this one is basically the internal fixation. The IV sedation is basically close reduction. That's how you do it. So if you're doing Nakoski, I would suggest to read it very thoroughly. But in QE1, you can read it like superficially as well. Then comes the specific complications. That's important. In QE1, and you have to read thoroughly. Recurrent dislocation, unreduced dislocation, shoulder stiffness, then rotator cuff or the capsular, then injury to the axillary nerve. As I said, then axillary nerve, artery nerve, or the brachial plexus. That's more important or more close to the shoulder. So those are the injuries that can present. And they do ask the questions, what in the shoulder dislocation, what kind of injury or what kind of nerve can be compressed or what kind of artery can be compressed. Then rotator cuff disease, mainly the frozen shoulder. That's important because in diabetes, it's kind of linked with that one. So they can give you a diabetic case, be like having a pain in the shoulder movement and all that. So in this one is basically outlet subacromial impingement. So painful arch syndrome is there, then bursitis and tendonitis. It's basically the insidious onset, but may present as an acute exacerbation. Pain worsens with the active motion, and passive motion generally permitted the pain. So